Hi, I am Skydops Timelines, and this is the first true episode of Kaarenuoma. In this series, I try to take a look at realistic city evolution, how a tiny settlement with medieval farming will develop into an urban city. I will try to link Finnish history to the series to give you some idea how pre-industrial society has evolved through recent Nordic history. In episode 0, or map creating episode, I established this timeline will start around the time when Finland, or rather Sweden, started to give up its open field system. So this first rendition of the map with residents will have features of both systems, an open field system as well as the Great Partition, where the fragmented strip fields of the traditional open field system were consolidated into unified holdings owned by individual households. This first example of a farm or a house is something that would have been quite typical, but a bit on the larger side of houses. It still has long and narrow fields, resembling the open field system. There is some vegetation and even trees between every field to separate the fields. Quite often in real life they would be separated with a narrow and shallow ditch, but that is way too difficult to achieve in this game. Also, dishes often have some water, which is good soil for certain type of vegetation anyway. Some of the fields, roughly every third, are turned into meadows. This three-shift farming gave a single field every third year time to recover its nutrients and give better harvest next year. I also decided to use ploughed and overgrown decals from the Countryside DLC to give at least some of the fields a bit more realistic texture. In the last series, Norindus, I actually managed to hit a proper limit with decals, so I decided to not plant them everywhere. Plus, I don't use Move It this time, making that level of detailing extra time consuming. If a field happens to have rocks, I would destroy them and plant new ones on the side of the field. This is something you would see in real life as well, or would have seen. A lot of our fields have been done with a slash and burn method, where a piece of forest would be taken down and then burned to make a fertile field to cultivate. This would often leave a lot of rocks and stones, which then would have been moved on the side of the field. Also the houses, which in this vanilla game play aren't exactly 18th or 19th century looking, got decorated with some props from the said DLC. Mainly there are different sheds and shacks to make the backyard look lively, as well as well, and outhouse and wood racks. Also, don't forget to put a few shacks in the middle of the field as well. Lastly, I will mention that I did use some industrial pluggables like silos to make the game work, as well as some agricultural shops, even if they were quite scarce back in the day. Some of the bigger villages in Finland had a mansion. It would be owned by a local nobility who would also rent their fields for local farmers. The farmers of the village, unless they had managed to buy their land to themselves, then worked a day or few in a week for the lord of the mansion and then did the farming in their own lands. Mansioners' fields would be bigger than the old stripes from the old system. Also, their backyards would be a lot bigger and they would have considerable gardens. I wanted to focus a bit more on forest than what is actually necessary. So I made some random shaped woodlots and clear cut them. These woodlots that aren't burned into a field would have been used to build stuff like houses. So the more there are houses and fields in the village, the less there is forest. I, for some reason, thought it would be realistic to put some dirt roads into the clear-cut lots. That is something that would happen these days, but not so much back then. The wood would be taken from the forest to the house by men or horses, but not cars, obviously. So these lots would have some visible trails, yes, but not quite that visible. Sorry for that. Notice also that the clear cuts, unlike these days, are nearby farms, for obvious reasons. To move on a bigger scale, let's talk about what a common village would have had. There would be a concentration of farms. A few is enough. Something between 3 and 8 would be very, very typical. Over 10 houses in a village were already on a larger side. But let's remember that each house used to have some 10 odd kids, older ones with their own houses, and some grandparents as well. So the population of a village would have been quite considerable anyway. Outside of the concentration, there were quite often 1 or 2 houses in the periphery, somewhat connected to the village, but not looking like being actually part of it. Not much else would exist in a regular village. Marketplaces and schools, etc., would come later on. Now, if the village was large enough, it might actually have a separate town-like concentration of houses. This village would often have all or most of the local craftsmen and some military personnel residing in the countryside. It often has a single road going through it, a lot of houses side by side, possibly forest nearby, and certainly farming areas. These might be the first places to get school, market, firehouse, and so on. To finally take a look at an even larger scale, let's see this place almost as a whole. There is a major road going from one edge to another. Beside that road there is the biggest main village. In this case it has developed into a very fertile place, basing its existence into agriculture. Also, its location nearby water might mean there have been some fishing happening before farming reached the area. Then quite often these larger villages attract some smaller ones. People do attract each other, mainly for safety reasons, even if it means that scarce resources have to be shared with more people. Then a handful of peripheral farms emerge as well, mostly for the same reason. These locations have something to do with fertility of the soil as well as connections to the outer world. I guess I've now said all I need. I will leave you with a couple of minutes of time-lapse footage as well as a final overfly, which we will use later on as the village starts to grow. This save game is available on Steam and the link is in the description. Thanks for watching and remember to subscribe and stuff.